Hello and welcome back to the show. Now, if you thought memory loss happened after 70, well, think again. It actually starts from 40, but we very often don't recognize the signs. Well, to help us improve our memory today, I am joined by a memory expert and mentalist known for his Power of the Mind shows. He's also a world record holder and the creator of the Power Brain Memory System. And he's also a multi-award winning sports broadcaster for TV and radio. Welcome to the show, Michael Abrahamson.
Thank you so much, Julia. Lovely to chat to you about a topic that's very close to my heart. And thank you for the opportunity.
It's absolute pleasure because this topic is so important. I was actually doing a little bit of research on the matter, and I came across a couple of things which were quite staggering, really. I think it was a piece of research that was done between 2013 and 2017. It was talking about early onset cognitive impairment, and it was saying that it was up by about 131%, and that people between sort of 50 and 59 in particular in the UK, this other information came, that people between 50 and 59 really at the most risk or struggling with recalling information, so memory, and that it was about 34%. But 24% of 50 to 59-year-olds, I think they struggle to process new information. And it's actually, this 40 to 60 time period is really important to start making interventions if you are concerned, particularly if you've got like high blood pressure or you drink a lot of alcohol, or maybe you're very inactive, quite sedentary, because these apparently put you at higher risk of cognitive decline later on. So what we're talking about today, I think, is really important. I know I find I'm 57 now. Memory goes, you walk into a room and you think, what am I doing in here? The classic. Yeah. But it's quite serious. And I think it's something that talking to you and helping people understand what's going on and how they can improve their memory is really important.
Okay, fantastic. I'm happy to help. I've just find that it's very, very important to keep the brain active as much as you possibly can. So even though, as you mentioned, I hold 3 memory world records and people say you have the most amazing memory, you can recall all sorts of information, both just in life in general and also when I'm working as a sports broadcaster to recall information about pretty much every player who's playing on the field. And if it's football, the previous clubs that they've played for and their goals that they've scored, or if it's cricket, some of their career stats. And I'm able to recall it at will. But the reason I can do that is because I'm constantly practicing and keeping the brain sharp, eliminating a lot of bad habits in my life. And I'm in that age group that you suggested could potentially be problematic. I find it's very individual of making rules in terms of memory based on how people approach the subject. So while the stats bear that out, and I do agree with them to some degree, I find that you can teach people who are 70, 80 years old, bridge players, for example, how to remember packs of cards and all sorts of things. It's very much dependent on how receptive people are to new ideas and how willing they are to work on their memory, because memory loss is something that is unfortunately a reality that we need to try and overcome, or at least retard the process if possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably one of the biggest concerns, isn't it, as we're aging, particularly with sort of increases in things like dementia and stuff like that. So being able to strengthen your memory, strengthen your brain function, your cognition is really key. But what's actually, is it just an age thing? Is there more going on that causes these things to happen? Is it just like stress, or you got so much else on your mind that you're not really paying attention? Or is it just we're becoming less, we're doing less reading, we're with technology, it's kind of taking away our ability to think and create and, I can't think of the word, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those factors. People are told, or young kids, I find, are told at school level that they have a bad memory and that they're unable to remember things. And the problem with the brain is as powerful as it is, and it's extremely powerful, it's also extremely lazy. So what happens is if you don't have to recall information, your brain says, I don't need to remember this, I won't remember it. For example, phone numbers. When I was growing up, I had to remember the phone numbers of every person in my contact list, and I made a conscious effort to lock it in. Therefore, I was able to remember it at will. These days, you find people have the numbers stored on their phone, so they don't have to remember anything. So they just press a button on their mobile phone and they contact the person without having to remember the individual digits. The same thing happens with spelling. In the old days, I say the old days, when I was growing up, spelling was extremely important. You had to consciously make an effort to remember how to spell words. These days, you have automatic spell checks on the computer. You have predictive text on your phones when you're typing a message. Your brain doesn't get the chance to learn how words are spelled because you don't have to do that.
Mm.
As you say, technology does it for you. So from that point of view, people become lazy in terms of the memory process and they don't make a conscious effort to remember. Also, there are a lot of bad habits that are not good for the brain. People are adopting all sorts of bad habits and bad techniques. For example, vaping is not good in terms of keeping the brain cells active. It does destroy brain cells from time to time, depending on the extent of how you do that. And it's damaging for the brain. You are inhaling all these poisonous chemicals, and especially in the long term, if you do it for long term, you are affecting your brain's capacity to retain information. So there are lots and lots of different factors that come into play. That's why it is so important to keep your brain active, to keep trying memory techniques, and to keep repeating things that you learn, because repetition is the mother of skill. It's such an important quote. And I teach this to people who are trying to improve their memories, that if you read something once and you don't make a conscious effort to remember it, it will be out of your memory within 24 to 48 hours. You won't be able to recall it. In order to be able to recall something, you need to go over it and over it and over it, ideally 5 to 10 times you possibly can, just to lock it into your brain and to move it from your short-term memory into your long-term memory so that you are able to recall it at will down the line. And a lot of people don't do that, or are not interested in doing that, or don't want to invest the time and the effort to make that happen. And as a result, they'd rather go with a label of, I don't have a great memory, therefore leave me alone and don't quiz me on memory technique. Whereas memory is not about a good or a bad situation. It's about having a trained or an untrained memory. And if your memory is trained, you can pretty much remember anything you want to.
Well, yeah, I guess it's a bit like training a muscle, isn't it? I mean,
Yes,
you're
exactly.
gonna get flabby, you're gonna have muscle atrophy and decline if you're not strengthening it all the time. So I guess it's
Correct.
the same with your brain. If, as I said earlier, we're getting more and more technology, and we're using our brains and our thinking and our processing less and less, which concerns me for the younger generation moving forward. What
For
their
sure.
cognitive decline is going to be like if they don't do things. You've got to find a way to use it. I mean, reading is like something I've always struggled with. I mean, I'm a kind of a slow reader. I can read a book I'm absolutely enjoying, but within 5 minutes of reading a few paragraphs, I've forgotten what I've read and I've got to go back
Mm,
and do that again. I mean, like you said about the telephone numbers, I can still remember my 3 old telephone numbers from back in the 70s and 80s, but I couldn't
yeah.
remember anybody's mobile number, forget it.
Yes.
Is a concern. How are we supposed to change that? Because obviously the aging process, hormones and all these sorts of things we can talk about, and how that's affecting you biologically. Is there more going on? I mean, what else can we do?
I think the most important thing is to try and live a healthy lifestyle if possible, because it's found diet definitely, especially a good diet, a good balanced diet, certainly helps the cognitive abilities of people and works the brain far more productively than if you stuffing yourself with fast foods all the time and effectively giving yourself a situation where you are eating food that's difficult to digest. So the blood's sitting in your stomach all the time instead of flowing through your brain, or you're having a lot of food that doesn't really help the brain to develop. So if you're eating really badly, that's not a good start. Also, exercise. Exercise is so important. I try and make a conscious effort to swim if I can pretty much every day for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. I have a very busy lifestyle and it's not always possible, but I try and do that because for me, I find swimming is a very, very good exercise. I don't enjoy it particularly. I've never really enjoyed swimming lengths in a pool, but I find it's me time. It gives my brain a chance to relax and freely associate. It takes away all the pressures of the day, and you're focusing on counting the lengths that you're swimming or just giving your mind sort of free rein to focus on other things. It's also very, very good for the body. It's good for toning. And you come out of there and you feel energized. And then after that, I try and spend a bit of time in a sauna or a steam room, even for 10 or 15 minutes a day, and then have a cold shower thereafter, because it just wakes up the brain. It gives you the right tools from a physical point of view to be able to get your brain to respond in the way that you would like to. And every time you're giving yourself bad food to consume, or you have bad habits, or you're not exercising enough, or you sitting in front of a computer or staring at a screen, you are slowly but surely destroying your brain's ability to regenerate and refunction. So I
Yeah.
think a combination of all those factors is critically important.
Well, I was wondering as well, because obviously you need plenty of blood supply to the brain, because when you're
Correct.
under pressure and stress. And I wonder as well, postural, like a lot of people are sitting at desks and stuff, and you
Yes.
get muscle imbalances and tension. That's then kind of restricting the blood flow in some ways to the brain. And when you're under pressure as well, that limits the blood flow to the brain, and you start not being able to think well. And the more you try and force yourself to recall stuff, or you panic, say you've got to go and give a quick, presentation or talk or whatever it may be, or recall something for an exam of some sort, and you
Yes.
start panicking, then there's less blood supply gained to the brain. You really can't think straight. You can't focus. It's impossible.
It's a very important point that you mentioned. As you say, when you go into panic mode, and I live in a country, unfortunately, where crime levels are particularly high and incidents happen all the time to people that I know or to high profile people. It happens. And if you find yourself going into panic mode, your brain is unable to find solutions to the problem. If you can force yourself to stay calm, just slow down your breathing. If you are in a life threatening situation, or even if you are in an exam situation, or maybe acting in a play and you have to remember lines, or you are broadcasting a football match, or you are, I don't know, doing a presentation at work, and you find yourself in a stressful situation, the important thing is to control your breathing as much as you possibly can and to stay calm. Force yourself to stay calm. The brain can only occupy one specific thought in any microsecond. So while
Mm.
people say that you can multitask, yes, you can switch between tasks, but in every split second, the brain can only focus on one thought at a time. So if you are worried about, oh, I'm not going to cope, I'm going to fail my exam, or my presentation is going to be a disaster, I'm not going to perform on the sports field, that is the message that you're sending to your brain, and your brain goes into panic mode and it can't find a solution. Whereas if you stay calm, just slow down your breathing, your brain is constantly looking for ways to resolve issues in your life. And if you can control your breathing to some degree where you can give your brain a chance to find a solution, it could potentially save your life. It could potentially allow you to beat an opponent in a sports field whom you would normally not be able to beat because maybe the opponent is stronger, but you have the mental fortitude to be able to get through that. It can help you to get through exams when you maybe doubt yourself, because if you give yourself positive messages all the time and say to yourself, okay, this exam is hard, therefore other people are probably also struggling. And instead of saying, I can't manage this, I'm poor at this subject, you can say to yourself, this is a really hard exam. I'm sure that many of my friends or many of my colleagues are struggling with it as well. So let me try and do a little bit better than them. And who knows, they might mark it very leniently. They might give me add bonus marks because people are struggling. They might mark according to a curve. Or on a sports field, if you're struggling against an opponent who is maybe better than you, but you start well, you start putting doubts in the opponent's mind. And he or she might doubt him or herself on the sports field, and therefore you have an advantage and you can cash in on that because your brain says, hang on a second, maybe I can win this. Maybe I can succeed. And you can achieve all sorts of things if you're willing to allow your brain the opportunity to get past the panic mode and to find solutions to problems. And I've had many examples of my students who've been in life-threatening situations who have been able to stay calm while the rest of their family have been panicking. And it's saved their lives and avoided a catastrophic situation in their own personal existence because of the fact that they've allowed their brain to find solutions. So yes, it's critically important.
So, I mean, you talked there about sort of in a serious situation, a life and death situation or a panic situation. I mean, that is something to be able to train yourself to actually stay calm is a skill. It's not something that, a lot of people are, particularly at the moment with things that are happening in the world, a lot of people have their fears and there's more violence, there's more, there's all sorts of terrible things going on in the world. And being able to, is that sort of, I would say when people come to you, is that sort of like the biggest worry for them, is like being able to stay calm in a panic situation, or is it something more sort of every day? They
No,
just
I'd say it's more every day. I teach a lot of students in my country, in South Africa. I go from school to school. I do a lot of presentations. I have parents, I have learners, university students, college students who come to me in terms of how to study correctly, how to improve their memory. As I say, I have bridge players, for example, come to me to show them how to remember cards in a game of bridge because that'll give them an advantage. Or just secretaries, for example, in companies who need to remember the names of people in their companies or need to remember names of clients so that if a client walks in, they can address them by name. There are very powerful memory techniques that allow you to do that. So I show them and I teach them these techniques. I run courses of about 2.5 hours at a time. So they're not long and lengthy courses bombarded with information. They are short and very, very much to the point. People can concentrate for long periods and can focus on what they need to learn. And they walk out of there with a lot of different skills that they need to take further and develop in their day-to-day life in order to be able to recall information. I'll give you an example if you'd like, or we can
Yeah, of
maybe
course.
do that later. So what I did just to keep my memory active, because I work a lot on cruise ships and I work internationally a lot. I often get cruise ship contracts because I am a professional mentalist. And part of what I do are memory demonstrations. So I talk to international audiences a lot, and you get people from all over the world, many of whom don't speak English as a first language. And I ask them to give me the name of a country or give me any country in the world, no matter how obscure the country is, or a country that they come from or a country that they'd like to visit. And then I give them information about that country, what the flag looks like, what the capital is, where it's located in the world. And I find that that resonates with people because they know that I've taken an interest in a country that means a lot to them. And therefore, they buy into this whole process and they are far more willing to learn as a result. So we can have a go at that if you'd like. I promise you, I'm staring at a screen. I have no information on my screen at the moment, and I can do this regularly. Also, just in terms of my world records, what happened there, just for interest for your viewers and listeners,
Yeah.
is just before COVID, there was an event that occurs once a year on the 14th of March. It's called World International Pi Day, because the number pi, the mathematical number pi, starts with, and so that's the third month, the 14th day. So every year on World International Pi Day, there are competitions around the world to try and remember as many digits of pi as possible. And the world record at the moment is probably close to 100,000 digits. So in order to say it back and have judges sitting there and watching you do that would take about 24 hours. So nobody wants to sit through that. Judges don't want to judge that. I don't want to do that. It's a massive effort. But what I did is I worked on the speed record for pi. In other words, reciting the
Okay.
digits, shorter amount of digits, but in a far, far quicker time. So my first world record was in 2019 when I recited the first 1,500 digits of pi, blindfolded, in 4 minutes and 7 seconds, which is a rate of 7 digits per second, without error, blindfolded with 3 independent judges following the process. And that was ratified. So that was my first record. And then unfortunately, COVID came along. And when it did, I was unable to try and break my record for the next 2 years. But in 2022, I decided I was going to go one better. So I did the first 2,000 digits in 5 minutes and 12 seconds, which is a faster per second rate than my first record. And then last year on Pi Day on my radio station, they wanted something short and sweet and to the point. So I did the first 200 digits in 30 seconds with 2 maths teachers who were in studio to follow that. And that was broadcast live on radio. So those are my 3 world records that I hold. And for that, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time because you actually have to control your breathing. Because every time you breathe in, it takes a second away from your time. So you have to control your breathing so that you recite the digits in a pattern that you are familiar with, and then take a breath at the end of that sequence and then continue. But it's highly demanding, and it's a few months of my life that I probably can't get back. But it does give me a tremendous credibility because I can
Mm.
do that when I go and talk at schools. I can say to people, call up the first 100 or 200 digits of pi on your phones, keep it in front of you, and I'm going to call it back to you in 30 seconds. And then they can follow and they think, wow, this is amazing. Look what you can do with your brain. And it helps them to buy into what I'm teaching. Because
Yeah.
I don't have a particularly amazing memory that I was born with. I have a memory that I've developed using a lot of different memory techniques and skills, and I refine it every single day. So if you'd
Well,
like, I can give you
well,
a few demos.
I
Yes.
did wonder, how on earth you found out you had this skill.
I don't know that I was born with it necessarily. I was obviously born with a reasonably good brain, but it's a matter of developing it over time and not listening to people who have said to me in the past, we don't know how good your memory is, or we doubt your memory abilities. It's more a matter of believing in yourself and showing that you can do it. And once you can, then you've got a lot of credibility. So students are more willing to attend my courses because they know that they could stop me in the street and call out a random country in the world, and I can tell them about that country. Or if I see them and they've been on my course 5 years ago, they can come to me and say, do you remember me? And I'll say, yes, your name is this and this and this. And you attended my course on this day and it was raining and you were sitting in the left in the front of the class and you asked me this question. And they're amazed that I can tell them that. But it's actually very, very easy because once you have certain trigger points that your brain automatically generates, you are able to pull out that information at will and call it out to them. And they're very impressed. So they buy into the process. And it's almost like one hand. We have an expression in Zulu, a language in my country, one hand washes the other. It's almost a reciprocal thing, almost like you scratch my back, I scratch yours. So they believe that they're getting something. I'm showing them what skills they can have, and everybody benefits from the situation.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And I do want to get into how you make this happen in a way that it's going to last and stick with people, especially with those of us who are getting older, who generally we do forget things very easily. So I would like to get into those, bearing in mind that this is we've got video. It's on video, people can watch, but we also on audio as well. So to really give people a good idea of how this works, because it's not just a case of is it sort of finding a word and repeating it, like you said. There's got to be a pattern that's familiar to you.
Well, yes, correct. And it depends on what you're learning. I taught myself, for example, to speak Spanish fluently without having a single lesson, just from various techniques that I use, watching videos on YouTube, for example, and putting up subtitles so that I can, in the language that I'm trying to learn. So watching it, for example, in English, but looking at subtitles in Spanish, and then vice versa. Watching videos in Spanish with subtitles in English, or using AI, for example, to have a chat to the computer and having a chat about a certain topic and saying to the AI program, I'd like to have a chat to you about sport, for example. So let's talk in the language. If I make a mistake, please correct my errors and tell me what I'm doing wrong, but let's keep it going. So if you're learning a language, then there are certain things you have to know. If you're learning a sequence of numbers, it's a slightly different memory technique. If you are trying to learn cards in a game of cards to improve your card play, then it's a different technique. So they all involve different techniques of memory that you need to try and, depending on what you're trying to learn, you would choose the methods that are likely to have the most success and be able to implement them accordingly. So there's no general rule. For example, learning names is a very different skill from learning a sequence of numbers in pi or learning flags of the world. So based on what you're trying to learn, you would use those particular memory skills and then you would cement them, go over them. Try, if possible, to do a bit of writing, a bit of reading, and a bit of listening, because that uses all parts of the brain. So, for example, when I was learning pi, what I would do is I would type up on my computer, I'd type in the first 100 digits of pi, for example, and cement those in my mind. Then I would record them on my phone and play them back at varying speeds and try and say them back in line with my voice and then increase the speed so I could get faster and faster and faster. And then also write them down, listen to them, re-say them, listen to other people saying them, because using all these different skills allows your brain to hone in on different avenues and it improves the recall ability. So you're very unlikely to forget anything that you have been through because you're giving your brain every chance to remember it. So it's a combination of factors.
Do you want to have a go on me and just see so we can have a
Okay, what would you like me to?
I don't know what I'm setting myself up for here.
Okay, so I can, depending on what you're trying to remember, if you are trying to remember something, depending on what you were trying to remember, I would teach you techniques for how to do that. It's very difficult to do in a podcast over the course of a few minutes to show you how to remember names and faces of people. But I'll give you some of the techniques just for interest, and then your listeners and viewers can research this a bit more. So essentially, and then I'll demonstrate, maybe you can ask me questions about random things that I've learned, and I will try and call them back to you and give you an idea of how it works. But essentially, there are different methods of memory. So the most basic method of memory is called the link method. And the link method is where you have different topics or different pictures that you are trying to recall, and you would link one item to the next item. So you would form preferably an illogical link between one item and the next. So let's say I'm trying to remember, say I'm making a speech and I have 5 different topics that I want to talk about. So I would start with the first topic and I'd have a picture, an image in my mind for what that topic is about. And I would make sense of it depending on what it is. And then I would link that topic to a picture of the next topic that I wish to talk about. So what happens is, as I think of the first topic, the second topic automatically pops into my mind because there's a natural link between them. You need to try and make your links as illogical as possible, because then it forces the brain to work and to be able to recall the information. So for
When you're
example,
saying illogical, do you mean sort of a bit obscure, a bit weird out there?
so I'll give you an example. So let's suppose I'm trying to think of a pen, and I wouldn't think of a pen lying in a pencil case on my desk, because that's very obvious. It's like an example. If I were to say to you, Julia, what did you have for lunch last Tuesday? You probably can't remember. But if I say to you, what did you do on your birthday? You probably can remember, because it was a special occasion. You had friends round, and that image will pop into your mind because it's more unusual. It's not something that happens very commonly for you. Whereas having lunch on a Tuesday afternoon or whatever day it is, that's something very common, and therefore the brain glosses over it. It doesn't make a conscious effort to remember it because it's not remarkable as far as the brain's retention ability is concerned. Unusual events, painful events, very happy events, joyous events stick in your brain a lot more than the run-of-the-mill events that you have every single day. So if I was trying to visualize a pen, and I was trying to get a link between, say, a pen and, I don't know, a computer, for example, what I would do is I would think of a pen that I'm familiar with, but some sort of action in my image that I'm trying to recall. So instead of thinking of myself writing with a pen, which is very boring for the brain, I would think of myself walking out of my place that I live and pens falling out of the sky and hitting me on the head, or picking up a pen and throwing a pen at somebody who's annoying you because they're making a noise and you're trying to concentrate. So doing something very unusual with a pen that you wouldn't normally do. Or I'd imagine myself playing tennis, and instead of using a tennis racket, I have a pen in my hand and I'm hitting the ball with a pen. Because it's illogical, it helps the brain to recall it far, far more easily than it would if you were just writing with a pen. And then I would link that, say, so I was trying to think about a computer, and that was my next topic I wanted to talk about. I would think of pens popping out of my computer screen. So as I stare at the computer screen, pens are coming out. So the moment I visualize a pen, I've automatically got a trigger, a natural trigger, which takes me to computer. And therefore I can go from pen to computer very, very easily, or backwards. Whereas if I didn't have that image in my mind, it would be a lot more difficult to remember. So the link method is linking different concepts or ideas or objects or names or faces or whatever you're trying to remember. And as you think of one image, so the second image pops into your mind, and you can go and do that very quickly. In fact, on my courses, I teach students as young as 8 and 9 years old to remember a list of 20 different items in the space of a few minutes. Call out a random list of items, and they form pictures and are able to recall that list back to me forwards and backwards. Because once you have those pictures cemented in your mind, it's impossible to get out of sequence, and it's impossible to forget. Then in terms of numbers, obviously you can't use that technique. You can't say, think of a 1, link it to a 3, link it to a 4. That doesn't make sense. So what you have for numbers is something called the phonetic alphabet. And the phonetic alphabet is a brilliant system of memory where every number has a sound associated with it. So an illogical sound associated with it. So for example, if I wanted to remember the number 25, the sound for a 2 is an N, so a N sound, and the code for a 5 is an L, or a L sound. So I would think of any word that starts with an N and ends with an L. So nail, for example, or null, or something like that. And that would be my trigger point to remember the number 25. So when I was remembering the digits of pi, I would make up a whole sequence of numbers and patterns based on objects. I would translate those objects to numbers. Obviously, it's very slow at the beginning, but once you get better at it and you practice it, you can do it very quickly. And then after a while, you know that sequence automatically, so you can forget about the pictures you formed and take it further and just remember the numbers by listening to it over and over and over again. It's like listening to the words of a song. Your brain just picks up on that. Then we have things like memory palaces, where you have different rooms in a house or in a palace, and you link certain items to objects within a room. So you can remember a whole lot of different patterns or a whole lot of objects or sequences or names by linking them to an entire palace of rooms. And that's quite a complicated system. So those are essentially some of the main memory systems that exist. But obviously, people who wanted to learn more would need to read up on this or do some research if they wanted to improve their abilities to retain information. But
I
that's
mean,
a sort of 5-minute summary of everything.
when you're linking, if you link the pictures, the images, these weird images.
Yes,
So say if
yes.
you're having to go and give a talk at a seminar or something, Are
Correct.
you sort of looking at those images, but also is that what triggers the memory of the words you've got to speak? Because obviously we've seen some politicians can be terrible. They've got their paper in front of them and they're
Yes.
just kind of reading off the paper. Well, it sounds much better if you project uh, from your memory.
Absolutely so. And that's actually what I say to people. I say to people, if you're reading from a piece of paper, nobody knows, if, say, it's in a school situation or at a university situation, your professors don't know whether you've generated that via AI and just printed it out and are just regurgitating information that you don't even believe yourself. Or alternatively, as you say, with politicians, and they reading a script that somebody else wrote, they don't even understand half the words that they're reading, and it doesn't have credibility. Whereas if you can talk off the cuff and you can talk about a subject that you're obviously very passionate about without having to refer to notes, it's far more believable. You're far more likely to get a response and to get buy-in from your audience because they know that you're talking about something that you obviously are passionate about. If I were to run a course and I were to say to people, I'm going to give you a list of 20 words to improve your memory, but I don't remember the words, so let me call them off a list for you. Immediately I've lost credibility with those people because they're saying you put yourself forward as a memory champion or a memory expert, and you can't even remember a list of your own words. So what chance do we have as mere mortals to try and remember those lists of words? Whereas when I give out a list, I remember it, I call it out forwards and backwards, we practice it over and over and over again and lock that information in. And then people have buy-in because they can see that this is clearly something that I've committed to memory. I've made the effort to do it, and it's not very difficult to do. So yes, absolutely. I take your point about politicians with scripts or even people doing talks at family functions or whatever it is. If they've got a big script in front of them, it's far less believable than if they can just talk off the cuff and relate things that are personal to them or personal to the people they're talking about. It's far more credible as far as their audiences are concerned if you can do that.
Well, I guess when you're reading I guess if you're not a natural talk speaker, because everyone
Yes.
panics about public speaking.
Yes.
And I guess why the paper's there, it gives you a sense of security. So I'm not going to mess up.
But then in
So
that case, then have keywords on your piece of paper. If you do that, or
then you
have
just have like
keywords or
little
cards,
notes,
just
don't
little
you?
short things that you want to remember, that's fine. I don't think anybody would mind about that. But when you're reading verbatim, word for word off a page, I think you lose a lot of the impact of what you're trying to say because you're looking down all the time. You're not maintaining eye contact with the audience. You reading. You don't want to lose your place on the script. So you're
Because then you
already
go into
blocking
panic mode and
yourself.
you forget anyway.
Correct, exactly. So that's my take on things. I know public speaking is a terrible fear. It's one of the biggest fears in the world at the moment. A lot of people who are not used to it are terrified of speaking in front of audiences. But you can give yourself some points for security. But if you can just try and talk naturally, or just try and, even if you're not a good speaker, just relate stories about, say, you're talking about a specific person or about your company, and you can just relate a story. That's far more personal and far more likely to get a response from the audience than if you're just reading sentences of a script that you wrote or somebody else wrote for you. So
Yeah.
that's my take on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to make a big difference, not just in sort of, passing exams and being able to recall the information you've learned or give a speech or whatever it is, or recall stats, whatever it may be. But what have you noticed in terms of when people start improving their memory and improving the strength of their brain? And what sort of benefits have you seen that is big benefits or surprise things that it's given people moving forward in
Massive.
that?
The first word that jumps into my mind is confidence. It gives
Yeah.
people confidence because firstly, they know that they have a skill that is not insurmountable for them. It's a skill that they can use. They can put it to use every single day. They don't have to necessarily remember digits of pi or remember 25 different names of people, but they might want to remember 2 or 3 names of people. They might hear a fact on a news bulletin and think that's interesting and commit it to memory. And who knows, maybe they're part of a quiz team and that a question about that particular topic comes up and something triggers in their brain. And they say, oh, hang on, I read about that a few weeks ago. And the information comes to them and they're able to answer the question correctly. So confidence is a big thing. It gives people the ability to realize it's not an insurmountable task. It's something that they can use. And as they see it working for them, so they are more receptive to the idea and willing to learn more, willing to commit more to memory because they feel, hang on a second, I can do this. I was told in the past that it's very difficult, but I'm actually seeing it's not that difficult. And it's something that I can practice and I can get better at. And it motivates them to do better. I have students who come to me 3 years, 4 years after they've attended one of my courses. And they said, you remember that list you gave us 3, 4 years ago. I can still remember most of that list. And they feel proud to be able to come to me and share that information with me, as if to show that, look how they've developed in terms of their cognitive and academic development over time by learning basic skills and developing them further. So confidence is, I think, a very, very big thing.
Well, I do wonder as well, because like when you're young, you do recall information. You just have that sort of brain, we remember when
Yes.
we were at school and being able to take exams. I mean, for someone like myself, we're constantly having to do continued professional development and take sort of mini tests and exams to recall information, and it becomes harder. So I do wonder if how important it is for us as we get older to learn a new skill, whether it's a language or gain some extra knowledge or something that actually makes us having to learn and remember, because we get away from that as we're getting older, because we're not at university, we're not at school anymore. So life takes over. But how important is it to every sort of year or every so often to learn something that makes us use our brain?
It just helps to delay the retardation process that happens naturally through aging. So you can keep your brain, if you can keep your brain active for longer, then you can go into your 70s, 80s, 90s and still have a very much functioning brain. It helps to prevent the onset of dementia over time. You're just keeping your brain active. You're keeping the brain cells active. Obviously, it's an individual thing. Different people need to remember different things at different times. But simply by doing a Sudoku puzzle or by
That's
solving
the
a
other thing I
cryptic.
was going to ask. It's like doing all these little puzzles and these sort of cognitive, because in sports, they use a lot of these cognitive
Correct.
games to work, if they were any good.
Absolutely. So little things like that, learning how to solve a Rubik's Cube, learning a few key words in a language. You don't have to learn to speak the language fluently, just to be able to say, hello, how are you? What are you doing? In maybe 2 or 3 languages. All very, very good for the brain because it's making the brain work. I mentioned earlier how the brain is extremely lazy. And if you allow the brain to become lazy, the brain just becomes lazy and almost gives up. But if you keep the brain active, your brain is forced to work. And when you make your brain work, your brain can surprise you. It can do incredible things. But you've got to meet it halfway. It's almost like trying to win the lottery without buying a ticket. You need to meet the process halfway. So you need to go and buy a ticket, and then you've got a chance. As minute as the chance might be, you're at least in the draw. In this situation, if you are doing little things for your brain and forcing your brain to work, you at least are giving your brain the opportunity to show you what it can do. If you want to switch off and you say, I don't need to remember that, I'm not going to remember that, it's already a negative mark against keeping your brain active. And therefore, certain diseases or retardation process accelerates because you're not making your brain work as much as you should. I'm fairly confident that based on what I do, that my brain will still be functioning pretty well in 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now because I'm making conscious effort to keep it as active as possible. And I find also when I'm, for example, away, when I'm on a cruise ship working or when I'm on holiday, and I come back after that break, I find my brain is a lot slower in terms of being able to recall information. It doesn't happen automatically because I've had a bit of a delay and I've given my brain a chance to switch off and relax. So it's important to keep your brain active as much as you possibly can by doing little things that you enjoy. You don't have to make it into a very demanding task. You can just do things that are enjoyable for you. Maybe solving a crossword puzzle is enjoyable for you. Maybe learning a few words in a language is enjoyable for you, or learning names of 5 people that you interact with whose names you don't know, who maybe you see and you know their faces, but you don't know their names. Learning their names and being able to address them by name. Maybe that's fun for you because it shows you that you can overcome a challenge. So all these little things certainly help the brain activity and help your brain process and delay the onset of retardation of the cognitive abilities going forward. So I'd say, depending on each individual, it's a pretty important thing that you should be working on.
Yeah. I mean, I would say if you can find something daily, like
Yes,
say nothing, like you say, nothing big, just something daily that you can do to just keep that going and keep the muscle working, is to find something like that.
absolutely. And for each person, it's going to be a different thing based on their requirements in their own life. But just by doing little things like that, you're helping the whole process. And you'll be amazed at how more alert you are mentally by doing it, how much you are able to recall, how well your brain responds to little cues that you're giving it, and how you are able to recall information from your past or specific events that you wouldn't normally be able to recall just by keeping your brain active. Because everything that has ever happened in your life, every person you've ever met, every experience you've ever had is somewhere stored away in your brain. But the problem is you can't always find it. Sometimes your brain has to search for long periods of time. And for example, if you meet somebody and you know their name, but you can't think of their name at that particular moment, what's happening in your brain is going through what's almost called the look search stage. So it knows the information is there. It's looking for cues. You're looking and for clues and cues based on the person you're talking to. So you're thinking, where do I know this person? And your brain's constantly going through all sorts of activities where you might potentially have met this person. Is it at a sporting event? Is it in an office situation? Was it at a show? Was it here? Was it there? And your brain is constantly searching for information. And the moment that person walks away, very often, because your brain is now relaxed and you're not forced to try and pull out the information, it comes back to you at a time when you're not under pressure. So what you need to do is give your brain as many cues as possible to be able to find that information. And you do that by locking it in and repeating it over and over and over again. So that's, for example, if you give me the name of a country in the world, my brain goes, okay, I know that country's stored in drawer number 163 in this part of my brain. I can go to it straight away and pull out the information. Whereas if I didn't learn it properly in the first place, I know it's in there somewhere, but it's more difficult for me to recall. And the same thing happens with students in an exam situation. They know they've learned the information, but they can't remember it properly because they're under pressure to recall it. And the moment they walk out of the exam room, suddenly it floods back to them and they think, okay, I know it now, because your brain is no longer under pressure, so it can take its time to find what it needs. And that happens so commonly to people in life. So it's all about locking it in initially.
No, that's fine. I was just wondering, because it just popped into my mind. I probably should have asked you this earlier, but I'll ask you now.
Okay.
When it comes to the difference between sort of short-term and long-term memory, because like for me, I can remember things from years ago, but the classic, like you say, remembering someone's name, I'll go in somewhere, I'll be introduced, and I know I'll walk away and I'll forget their name. So I'll be there, and in my mind, I'll have to keep repeating it. But for some reason, as soon as I've walked away and you talk to someone else and you can't remember the name, and then you get talking to them again and you think, I can't ask them again. It's embarrassing. It's rude.
It is. It's extremely embarrassing for people. But the point is, because you didn't hear the name in the first place. Or if you did hear the name, you didn't lock it into your brain. You didn't make a conscious effort to remember it. So with names, what's very important is when somebody tells you their name, if it's a common name and you know a lot of people with that name, then associate that person whose name you're trying to remember with somebody who has the same name or a similar name that you already know. And just form a picture in your mind of maybe those two people talking to each other. So when you look at the person whose name you're trying to remember, you think, oh, okay, they were talking to Michael Jackson, for example. Therefore, their name is Michael. And there's your picture just to cement it. And once you know it, use the name often in conversation. So when you're talking to the person, every now and then, bring up the name and say then, so Michael, what did you think about yesterday's weather? What do you think about this or that? Because every time you use the name, you're giving your brain an extra trigger point to be able to lock it in and remember it. Name has unusual spelling, or maybe it's a name in a foreign language, then even better, because then you can take an interest in the name. You can say to the person, okay, what does your name mean? What is it? Does it come from a different language? What does it mean? How do you spell it? And all these little clues are going to help you to recall that information. Whereas if somebody says, my name is John, for example, and you're not listening to the name, a few seconds later, it's gone because you didn't lock it into your short-term memory. And therefore, when you're trying to remember it in the spur of the moment, you can't. Important is to listen for the name, because most people hear a name and they think to themselves, I'm never going to have to use this name again. So they hear in their brain, hi, my name is... That's what they hear. And their brain doesn't make a conscious effort to lock that in. So a few moments later, that information's gone. It's disappeared out of their short-term memory. They can't get it back. And as you say, it's embarrassing to go to a person and say, I'm sorry, what did you say your name was? Or ask them an indirect question, hoping they'll reveal their name. Whereas if you listen in the first place and you make a conscious effort and your brain almost does this on autopilot, and you use the name a few times in sentences, then it will make a lot more sense to you. For example, living in South Africa, as I do, we have 11 official languages. And so when I'm broadcasting, for example, a football match, you have people who speak different languages. So they have click sounds, they have unusual sounds, different letters are pronounced differently in the different languages. So you learn from time and from experience when you hear a name to ask questions about it. I say to the person, okay, is that a Zulu name or a Xhosa name or a Sotho name or whatever it is? And how do you spell it? Is the L pronounced as an L or is it pronounced as a D in your language? And how do you say it? And I make a conscious effort to try and listen for the name and to try and get the pronunciation right. And therefore, all these things help me to be able to recall it. I'm also a gymnastics commentator, and I've commentated on Eastern Europeans, Polish people with surnames that go on forever, or
Yeah,
long Russian.
those are tough ones to remember.
It's terrible to remember, but what I do is I break it down, I make it meaningful for me. And then I use the name as much as possible in different sentences. Or I'll sit with somebody and say, pronounce your name for me. Say it again. I'll say in my brain, what does that name sound like to me? How can I remember it? And what trigger can I use to be able to recall it? And all these little clues are helping your brain to recall information.
Does using phonetics help with recalling a
Yes.
name?
Yes, phonetics, mnemonics, all sorts of memory. As I said, phonetics with numbers particularly. Numbers are associated with sounds. So using phonetics and sounds are very, very useful, particularly for people who are audio learners who can listen to something and pick it up. And mnemonics are very, very good. If you can, for example, give yourself a saying, like, for example, to remember the colors of the rainbow. Everybody knows Roy G. Biv in order. So if you just remember that as a word, you can remember the colors go red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, because you have a little saying or a little mnemonic that can help you with that. The last 6 months of the year are Jason D. July, August, September, October, November is Jason, and then D for December. So if you want to remember that in order very quickly, not that you would need to remember the months of the year, but just for an example, you can make up a little saying for yourself or something that can trigger something in your brain to help you to recall that. I use that a lot. Mnemonics a lot, and phonetics and various other sayings and little clues for the brain, because every clue you can give the brain is an extra method of recall that allows your brain to pull out that information. So yes, absolutely.
If you were to say your top 5 sort of, someone said, right, I'm going to start doing a few exercises to try and improve my memory and strengthen my capacity there, what would you say would be your top 5 things that people could try today to see if it could help them?
I wouldn't give you 5 necessarily because I think it's a very individualistic thing. It depends on people's requirements in life. But what I would say is something mathematical. So something with numbers, whether it's solving a Sudoku puzzle or whether it's just learning a couple of quick mathematical calculations, just to practice something with figures, because that uses the left side of the brain. So that is good for that side of the brain. Then what I would do is I'd say, write down a list of 5 items, just 5 items or 10 items if you can manage. Write it down on a piece of paper. Maybe look around your room and find 5 different items that are lying there. Write them down and then just try and use the technique where as you think of one, you make an associated image to the next one and try and call out that list without looking at the paper. If you get stuck, go and reinforce the image that you were at the point where you were getting stuck, because clearly that image was too logical for your brain and it glossed over it. So maybe write down a list of 5 or 10 items and try and call them back, because all this is developing the neurons between the left and right side of the brain. Then maybe a language that you've always wanted to learn. Learn 5 words of vocabulary, 5 basic words in a particular language. So maybe hello, how are you, or little saying, very, very basic words that you would use in an everyday conversation. And learn those expressions. Maybe get yourself a dictionary or type in on the computer, how do you say this particular thing in Russian, for example, or in Japanese, or whatever language you're trying to learn. And just learn 2 or 3 new words every now and then and see if you're able to recall them. Because this is something you might be able to use in your day-to-day life. You might meet somebody who speaks that language, and even if you just greet them and you just say, hello, how are you? Already you're building a rapport with that person, and you're giving your brain a fantastic, useful tool that it can use going forward. And who knows, you might be good at it and you might want to develop that and ultimately learn to speak the language at a basic or even intermediate level. So I would say something mathematical, something linked if possible, and something with pictures or lists that you can recall, because that works both sides of the brain together and just strengthens the neurons. So those would be my top 3. And the other 2 would depend on individual requirements. Maybe learning names of people and trying to recall their names or facts like that. That's what
And
I
is
would say.
there a difference between if you're learning something on paper as opposed to like a screen, a digital screen as well?
It does help if you can write something down. So if you can write it down in your own handwriting, because your brain is familiar with your own handwriting, it's far, far more useful to write something down and be able to read it back in your own handwriting. Because by writing it down, you're forcing your brain to learn how to spell the words, what the words mean in context, what they look like in your own handwriting. Whereas if you're reading something on a screen or it's something that is typed, maybe out of a book, your brain is picking up on the typed words, but it's not making a conscious effort to remember how those words were spelt because it doesn't resonate with you. It's just cold, bold-faced type on a page. Whereas if you're writing it down yourself, it helps your brain to recall. So So I advocate a lot of writing, reading, and listening, and combinations of those, and then testing yourself if you're trying to recall information, because it uses different skills that allow your brain to pick up on information and helps the recall ability.
Fantastic. Look, if people want to find out a little bit more about you and what you do,
Yes.
where can they actually find you?
I can give you that in a moment, and I'll give you some information. We said we were going to do a demo or two, so maybe would you mind if I do? Would you mind if I do that first,
absolutely.
just to show people how easy it is? All right, so Julia, we haven't rehearsed this.
I forgot already.
There you go. You're welcome to attend one of my courses with grace and pleasure. But what I can assure you, and I can swear to you, that I do not have the information on my screen. I'm looking at yourself and myself on a podcast at the moment. I don't have the information around. It's all been stored in my brain. And people can stop me in the streets and I will do this demonstration for you. So what I'd like you to do is give me any country in the world. It must be an independent country, not a country that belongs to another country, but any independent country. There are about 197 at last count, independent countries in the world. So just give me any random country and I'll try and tell you a little bit about that country just purely from memory.
Tajikistan.
Okay. Tajikistan.
I don't know why Tajikistan, it came to my mind.
Tajikistan is one of the 7 stans, former USSR countries are formerly part of the United Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It's in Asia. The flag, it has 3 horizontal stripes, red, white, and green. And in the middle, there are a whole group of stars. It almost looks like a candle in gold in the center of the flag. That almost looks like the candle is juggling stars. The capital of Tajikistan is Dushanbe, and it's spelled Dushanbe. And it's a very, as I say, it's one of the stans. There's 7 of them in total. The most common one is obviously countries like Pakistan and Kazakhstan, but there are 7 in total of countries that whose names end with stan. And Tajikistan is probably one of the more uncommon of those particular countries. So, as I say, the capital is Dushanbe, and I've described to you the flag. That information, just incidentally, took me around 11 minutes to learn initially, the flags of all and the capitals of all the countries. And then obviously constant repetition helps to lock it into your brain. Give me one more just for
one more
argument's sake.
country.
Any other country, anything. Can be common, uncommon.
Okay, let's go for...
Be nice. No, I'm joking. Any country you like.
Now my mind's gone. There's all these countries going on in my mind.
Right.
Say Finland.
All right, Finland. It's one of the Scandinavian countries. Borders Russia, borders Sweden, and borders Norway. At the top, the flag is a blue cross, an asymmetrical blue cross on a white background. The capital is Helsinki. I've been to Helsinki a few times. Then they say that the life expectancy, and particularly in the Scandinavian countries and in Finland, is one of the highest in the world, because apparently they have a very, very good manner of living and eating. They eat healthily. They eat a lot of oily fish. They spend time in saunas regularly, which is supposed to be really good for your health. I don't know. They have it down to a fine art. And I think they have a relatively stress-free life compared to other countries in the world. So that's Finland. I'll do for you very quickly, if you like, my pi demo, because people are often fascinated by that. So I'll just do the first 100 digits of pi for you, just to show you how it can be done. And I'll try and do it at world record pace. And people can check, if they are listening to this, they can pull it up on their screens and check it out. But this is what I had to do to be able to break the world record. I had to do this times 20, but I'll just do the first 100 for you. I won't call out 2,000 because it takes about 5.5 minutes to do. So the first 100 would go as follows. And then maybe I'll talk briefly about how I remember it. So it's like this. 3.14159265358979. That's the first 100 of pi. That was probably around 13 to 14 seconds. So that's about 7 digits per second. And as I said, you have to control your breathing. You have to say O instead of 0 because it takes a split second off the time. And what I did is I learned them in chunks of about 10 digits at a time, and then cemented them, locked them in, made recordings on my phone and played them back and tried to stay with the speed that I was saying it at, then made it a bit faster, then wrote it down, then listened to it a few times, then wrote it down again, then recalled it again. So I'm using all the skills that I've spoken to you about in this podcast to try and help me to lock that information in. Then when I was happy that I knew the first 100, then I went on to the next 100 and the next 100. And these days now, even when I have some downtime, for example, if I'm sitting in a steam room or a sauna at gym, which, as I said, I do most days of the week. It's very boring if you sit there and you've got nothing to do and you're just thinking about how hot it is and how you're going to pass out at any minute. You need to give your brain something else to think about. So what I will do is I'll just say in my head, I'll say the first 500 digits of pi. And then I look at the clock and I say, oh, I've been here for 5 minutes already. I'm doing well. And I haven't thought about how hot it is. I'm just giving my brain something else to think about. Go through random countries in the world and just refresh their capitals and their flags and their currency or whatever I need to remember. Or I will try and remember the phonetic alphabet or various things just to give my brain something else to occupy itself. So I'm not consciously worrying about how hot it is or how I'm feeling uncomfortable. And after a while, you find the time passes and you've given your brain a workout and you haven't really wasted the time. It's been physically beneficial to me because of the health benefits of being in that place, but I'm also working my brain mentally and it doesn't feel like I'm doing that. So that's typically what I do.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of it as well as a bit of a stress relief. If you're feeling under pressure or stress, if you start focusing on something else, like you
Yes,
say, all
correct.
these doing these little exercises, then it takes your mind off whatever's bothering you or worrying you or stressing you.
Absolutely. So to answer your question about where people can find me, I'm
Yes.
based in South Africa, but I have very active social media. My website is probably a good place to start. It's Power Brain, one word, like brain power, but the other way around. So Power Brain. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a .com website because for some reason it was taken when I tried to apply for it. So it's .co.za, ZA being the code for South Africa. But if you search Power Brain, my name will pop up. I have all my social media links on my website. I have videos of what I do. I have a YouTube channel. The link is on my website as well. And I'm active on Facebook. I have a business page and a personal page. What I do is I post information about the brain, fun quotes, facts about the world, puzzles for the brain every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on my Power Brain page on Facebook, also on X and on LinkedIn, where I'm easy to find. So if people want to just try something that's a bit of fun, an exercise for the brain, or sometimes I ask you some random questions that just allow your brain to have a bit of a workout. And then the following week, I post the answer. So you can interact with me on those platforms and have a go at my quiz questions or my puzzles that I ask. So that's quite nice. It's just a way to keep the brain active. And I have a lot of students that engage with me on that as well. And on my YouTube channel, I have videos about how I learn languages, some of my broadcasting highlights, some of my mentalism routines, walking around on a cruise ship, for example, and just pulling out a random person and saying to them, think of something and telling them what they're thinking of by using body language and eye movement and probability. So these are fun demos that people can have a look at. But the website essentially has all the updated information and also has a contact form. People can email me and stay in touch if they're interested to learn more. And I do some courses via Teams or via Zoom or via various platforms online, although predominantly a lot of my courses are done in person because I find it's far nicer to be able to engage with people in person rather than behind a screen. But I do courses behind a screen as well via various mechanisms, and I travel extensively. So who knows, there are opportunities.
So there's no excuse for anyone to not be able to start practicing their memory. There's lots
Correct.
of resources there for you to go and try. So I do advise
Absolutely.
people to go and give that a go. And doing quizzes is always a bit of fun as well. So why
Yes.
not get out there and do that? So look, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We've learned a lot. And I think this is going to be really important moving forward. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for everybody else for tuning in. And I hope you've benefited from all the information we've been sharing today. So we look forward to seeing you next time on Unleash Your Inner Athlete.